I've really been looking forward to today's program. I've gotten to know today's speaker over the past couple of years, and I really admire his leadership and his outlook on the world. He grew up in Chicago, and he received his PhD in accounting from Ohio State University. He joined the faculty of the University of Washington Business School in 1977 and went on to distinguish himself as an award-winning scholar and teacher. In May of 2005, following an exhaustive nationwide search, he was appointed Dean of the UW Business School, which just goes to show you never appreciate what you have right here in your own backyard till you go looking around. And I watched as this search went on, and believe me, they brought in candidates from all over the country in order to determine the guy we had right here was the best qualified. I can tell you from personal experience, he's the right man for this job. Straightforward, approachable, confident, and decisive. Please join me in welcoming Dean James Jiambalvo.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I want to thank President Bill and Dave Endicott and the Program Committee for inviting me to speak. It's an honor to be with the Seattle Rotary, which, of course, you know has the distinction of being the second largest Rotary in the world. Well, my topic today is about educating future leaders. And you know, the term leadership has a lot of different meanings. There's not a lot of agreement on what leadership means. So when I became dean, you know, I'm an academic. I went out to the bookstore. I bought a book on leadership. And the book, basically, I got through the book. It said, you have to be charismatic. And I thought, now, how the heck is that going to work? I'm an accountant, as you know, Bill said. I'm not going to be charismatic. So then I thought I'd go to someplace a little more academic. I went to the Harvard Business Review. And an article about leadership written by an esteemed academic, he said, well, you know what leaders have to do? They have to optimize limited resources. In other words, figure out how to best use what you've got. And I thought, well, you know, I think that's important, and we're going to do that. But again, that's not going to work. I had my meeting with President Mark Emmert, and he told me my job is to increase resources, not optimize current resources. So, you know, go out and raise a lot of money. So finally, I thought I'll sit down with our management faculty who specialize in leadership and see what they have to say. So we sat around a conference table in McKinsey Hall, and they said a leader has to be someone with an aspirational vision of success, a strategy for achieving the vision, the communication skills needed to convey the vision and the strategy to stakeholders. A leader needs change management skills, team building skills, time management skills, and boundless energy. And I thought, I can relate to that. That's me, basically, right? But they left out the part about being tall and good-looking and Italian, but other than that, so I think I've got some handle on leadership. But, well, before I get into the substance of my talk, let's have a show of hands. How many people here went to the University of Washington? Wow, that's huge. How many went to Washington State? Okay, another. How many, either at Washington State or the University of Washington, how many of you went to the business school? Okay, I think there's an important point there. The University of Washington and the business school in particular is having a profound impact on developing leaders. I mean, if you want to find the premier leadership group in Seattle, it's the Rotary, and look at how many people, had the benefit of going to the University of Washington or Washington State and the business school. In fact, we recently sent a survey to our alumni, and we got 8,000 responses. Out of those 8,000 responses, we asked people, did you ever form a company? And out of the 8,000 responses, there were 3,000 companies started, companies that created 300,000 jobs and today have $80 billion in revenues. Again, I think that shows you that whether you're an individual, you're a company, or the state, making investments in higher education is extremely valuable to our region. So I hope you're convinced that higher education and business education in particular is important, and if you believe it's important, then you want to know, well, what are we doing in business education today? What are we doing to prepare future leaders? Well, first of all, some background about business. It's a bit different, certainly from when I went to school, and probably from when many of you went to school as well. Here's some programs we have. We have an undergraduate bachelor's program, a day MBA, an evening MBA, a technology management MBA, a regional executive MBA, a North American executive MBA, and a global executive MBA program. And those are just the degree programs. We also do certificate programs for companies like Boeing, Weyerhaeuser, Starbucks, et cetera, and even companies from around the world. In fact, right now, we have a banking program going on for banks from the Pacific Rim, where we have something like 56 bankers from 14 countries over at the University of Washington. So there's much more activity, and you might look at these statistics on MBA programs and say, wow, MBA programs must be really great to attract so many students in all these different market segments. But actually, MBA programs have really come under fire in, I'd say, the last 10 years in particular. So what did the critics say about MBA programs? Well, they say the graduates have been faulted for their lack of practical know-how. They don't have team skills. They don't have leadership skills. They lack global expertise. They lack communication skills. They don't receive training in ethics. And to top it off, if you look at the faculty, they're overly focused on research, and they don't want to consider real-world problems. Boy, those are really tough criticisms, right? Well, I think there's something you have to keep in mind when you read those articles. There are 1,000 MBA programs in the country. So when you read these criticisms of MBA programs, which ones are they talking about? The bottom 50, the bottom 500, the bottom 800, or every MBA program? Now, I'm going to argue that the top business schools, and I'll include the University of Washington Business School in that set of top business schools, that we're doing a much better job than we did years ago, and we've made a lot of progress in the last 10 years, and I'm going to tell you something about that progress. So this is going to, I hope this doesn't look too defensive, and I'll get back later in my talk talking about what I think the real challenges are, and we have some very significant challenges, but I think the typical criticisms you hear are not relevant for some of the very good business school programs. So let's take research. If faculty are doing research that's, it's mumbo jumbo, it's not relevant. Well, I'm not going to say every research paper that's ever been written is useful, but there certainly is some very, very useful research. So let's look at the work that Bill Sharp did in the 1960s at the University of Washington. Bill Sharp received the Nobel Prize, and he developed something called the capital asset pricing model. Now, after that, there was a whole stream of research, I've done some of this myself, on market efficiency. And the upshot, I would say, from that whole stream of research, not from any individual study, is that we have funds like Vanguard with very low fees that try to come up with some measure of what's the risk profile of a particular investment set of stocks. And one study estimates that these Vanguard funds save $3.5 billion in fees a year. Now, if you bring that back to present value with just a 2% rate, that amounts to $175 billion in present value terms. I'd say that stream of research was pretty valuable. So, you know, and how do you think Bill Sharp's research on the CAP-M was viewed in the 1960s? He had trouble getting his article published because it would seem too esoteric even for academics. So, you know, I think you've got to keep in mind that some research is hard to understand, and the fact that everyone can't read it, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but ultimately it should have some practical value. Okay, how about the assertion that academics don't want to deal with messy real-world problems? You know, a lot of faculty members use cases, and the most famous case writing institute is at Harvard. And if you look at some of these cases, you know, they're 25 or 35 pages. They're very, very detailed. They're not structured. I mean, you have to put your arms around them. It can take you 2 or 3 hours to read one, 4 or 5 hours to prep your case. Last year, 20,000 academics signed up on the Harvard website to go through their cases and purchased 6 million cases. Now, to say that faculty don't want to deal with messy real-world problems, where's the evidence? I mean, there's clear evidence, in fact, that they're dealing with very complex problems. Business schools also have lots of other connections to the real world. One relevant to the Rotary is our Business and Economic Development Center. We have students working in teams with small minority businesses, and they have a mentor from the Rotary. What a wonderful real-world learning experience to get someone from the Rotary who knows the business field, helps the students get real-world experience, and the minority businesses are doing, you know, a better job and moving towards success. We had last year over 200 executives speaking in various classes. President Bill was one of those, talking about outsourcing. So again, there's a connection to the real world. We engage in many national case competitions. We had a team that won the venture capital investment competition against schools like MIT, Harvard, Stanford, et cetera. And in that competition, they have to role-play VC firms that are funding real pitches from companies that want funding. And again, they were the #1 group in the country. We also have a business plan competition. This business plan competition has $75,000 in prize money. It was won this year by a UW team, and the fix wasn't in, I can guarantee you, because they were the only UW team that won. The UW team won first place, but no UW team won in any other category. But this team had a really cool thing. What they've got is, I have to look at my notes here, a biodegradable injectable polymer. And what you do with this is you insert a drug into this biodegradable injectable polymer, and then you can get a shot where you need the medicine to be. So it doesn't just wander around, you know, your whole blood system. The drug stays in the area that needs attention. So that was a great, great project. How about ethics? Okay, we have a course in ethics in the first year of the MBA program. In the undergraduate program, ethics is infused in the curriculum. This past year, we also had a special course joint with social work on corporate social responsibility. We had speakers from Starbucks, speakers from Costco, talking in other companies, talking about policies that are socially responsible and let the company gain a competitive advantage. I thought it was just a wonderful course. Communication and team building, what's going on there? I will say, I think we were late to the table doing something with communication, leadership, the soft skills, but we're really going after it now. We start off now when MBA students come into the program with a 360-degree assessment. They have to make presentations, they get assessed by judges, and then they get an individual action plan about what they need to work on over the ensuing 2 years so that they'll really, make some progress on their communication, team building, leadership skills. Just to give you some idea of how much effort we're putting into this or resources, this program's costing us $1,600 a student. That's not a trivial amount of money. So we think leadership, communication skills are important. We're going after that. Global. We're infusing global throughout the curriculum. So if you take a finance class, of course you're talking about exchange rates. If you take an accounting class, you're talking about international accounting standards. If you take a management class, you talk about managing teams from different countries and different cultures. So obviously, I think there's some things we're doing right, but I will say again that we have some challenges. But before I turn my attention to them, I want to introduce a couple of our students that I brought along. And when I wrap up here, I'm going to ask them to join me on the podium so you can ask questions of the students and get the straight scoop, not the scoop from the dean here. So the first person is Brad Clark, who's a second-year MBA student. Brad, would you please stand up and be recognized? Brad's a former Amazon employee. Most recently, he was a Marine Corps officer who completed a tour of duty in Iraq. In the first year of the MBA program, he had 3 mentors, including managers from Boeing, Saltchuk, and Alaska Distributors. Last year, he went on a study tour of China where he visited 12 companies. In our communication leadership program, he's worked directly with Susie Schneider. Susie is a former writer for Saturday Night Live. Now, we are not trying to train Brad to be a stand-up comic, but Susie is able to train people to give very concise, compelling presentations, and so that's why we're using her. This summer, Brad has an internship with a company called North Star. It's a subsidiary of Saltchuk, and the plan is that he's going to send a proposal to Saltchuk's board in September, and Brad knows, of course, that I'm on the board of Saltchuk, so Brad, I don't want you to feel any extra pressure about this, but I'm sure you're going to do a good job. Okay, the second person I'd like to introduce is Sarah Malcolm, and Sarah is a recent graduate of the program. Sarah, would you please stand up? Sarah graduated in 2005 with a finance degree and is working for Goldman Sachs. I think it's fair to say that Sarah did have a transformational learning experience. I believe she grew up in Cle Elum and was the first person in your family to go to college, complete college. I would say for myself that was also the case. Sarah said that she felt a bit lost as a freshman when she entered the business school, but found a community that opened up a whole new world for her. She joined a business student fraternity, Alpha Kappa Psi, became the president. She organized a finance club, which is still thriving. She had 2 great internships, one with Goldman Sachs, and you can tell that they were impressed by her, and she's now joined Goldman Sachs. And she was also in a case competition that took her to Montreal to compete, and she also did a study tour in Italy. So I could go on all afternoon about these 2 fine young people and the hundreds of others, but let me get into some of the challenges we have. And that way I guess I can end on a pessimistic note. which maybe I should take these communication classes, but it's a little late. So, challenges. First of all, our marketplace is changing tremendously. If you go back 10 years ago, about 30% of the MBA students were evening students, 70% were daytime students. It's switching all over the country to be more 70% evening, 30% day. So students want flexibility, and the message to us at the UW is keep the lights on. So we're going to have to really figure out our strategy there. There's a lot of competitions from new schools. Schools are popping up all over Asia and Europe. And, you know, in our MBA program, our day program, about 30% of our students do come from Asia and Europe. So we're going to have a lot of competition there. There's competition via technology. About 6 months ago, Cornell opened up a program in Seattle, which they call Cornell, you know, Ithaca, New York, opened up a program they call the Boardroom Program. Now, personally, I'm not worried about that program, but it's a shot across the bow. Why am I not worried about it? Well, it's 8 people sitting in a room watching television, and I don't think executives will find that as compelling as being in our executive MBA program with world-class instructors being able to directly interact with their fellow students and the instructors. But it's important to recognize that. Very significant problem. The supply of PhDs is nowhere near the demand for PhDs in business. So the estimate right now is there are 2 openings for every 2 to 3 openings, depending on which study you read, for every graduate coming out of a PhD program in business. So what's the upshot of this? It's going to be tough to recruit. Salaries are going to go up. That's going to lead to salary inversion. What do I mean by salary inversion? We're going to be paying entry-level faculty members more than some full professors. Now, in some cases, that's fine. I mean, if someone is not keeping up in their field, of course they shouldn't, you know, be paid particularly well. But in some cases, that's going to be a real problem. We're going to have to deal with that. We're also facing declining support from the state for building and operations. So we have a plan right now to build 3 new buildings, and we're breaking ground on the first 2 in 2008. Those 2 buildings, I believe, are the first 2 to be 100% privately financed in the history of the University of Washington. There is going to be some public financing of the 3rd building, which will be in 2 years later. If you look at our whole budget, 15% is the state's contribution above tuition. So, you know, think about that one. We're 15% away from being a private school. We're not going to be a private school. We have a responsibility to the state. We like that responsibility to the state and the region, but it just shows you the level of funding isn't there. We have to be very aggressive in doing executive education for companies from around the world, et cetera. So, you know, there's no easy answers to these problems. Our approach is basically to listen. We want to make listening a core competence. We're going to be listening to business leaders, all of our stakeholders, and we hope that we'll listen better than any other school, and we'll be able to see what's on the horizon rather than, you know, what happened 4 years ago. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about these challenges. I would really welcome your input into the solution to them. And now let me ask our 2, an alum and a future alum, to join me on the podium, and we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim. We had such a great response to our Q&A process last week where we had people queue up here. Danner is going to come up and get an iron grip on the microphone, and those of you who would like to ask questions, please come up. But I'd just like to start by asking, it's Sarah, right? So tell me, Goldman Sachs, that's a pretty competitive environment. Did the UW prepare you well for that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I interviewed, with competing against schools from all over the nation and in some cases the world. And I spent 3 weeks in New York training with, students from Wharton, from MIT, from all those schools, and I felt better prepared and, if on an equal level as well as those students. I think I was very well prepared by the business school, and there were ample opportunities to help me do so.
Great. Good answer.
I have a question regarding your undergraduate program, and that is, how easy is it for students that are in other colleges of the university, such as arts and science, to take courses in the School of Business if they are not formally admitted into the School of Business? I know when I was there, it was easy to do, but I hear that's not the case anymore.
We have a program called Business Fundamentals, which is accounting, marketing, and management, and those courses are set up specifically for students, say, in engineering or in liberal arts that actually want to get into some business school clubs. So, for example, we have a retail management program, and you don't want to come into that program with no idea of marketing, but you could take an accounting class, a marketing class, and an HR class, and probably do just great in that club. So we do have a program. It's one we always think about because, your outreach to the university is very, very important, but the funding's coming from, the business schools. But I agree that's very, very important to do, and we are doing it.
You both took the opportunity to the two students, a grad and the new grad, you both took the opportunity to go overseas and study. How did that impact you and prepare you for what you're about to do and what you are?
Go for it, Brad.
I was overseas for just 2 weeks for the study tour. It was between the winter quarter and the spring quarter. It was a part of... Is that a little better? Yeah. Pardon me. And we went over to China. There were a group of 25 of us that went to China. There were 3 other study tours as a part of the MBA program at the same time. One went to, Japan, Australia, China, and I'm blanking on, India's coming up this year. I know that they've got one there. And we met with 12 different businesses. We also got to do some cultural activities and kind of break down some of the barriers or some of the stereotypes that I had of what Chinese people or Chinese businesses would be like, and reinforced some others. It was a very valuable experience.
My program wasn't as business focused as Brad's was, but it was for 3 months, and I think the biggest impact it had on me was that I was thrown into a completely unfamiliar situation, very uncomfortable, very nervous, and I think that prepared me for any similar situation, whether it be in business, academics. I think being able to handle yourself in an unfamiliar situation was, the best preparation for my future career that I could have obtained. And I think I've told everybody I've talked to that I would strongly, it's not built into the business curriculum unless you're in international business, but it was worth the time to do it and worth the cost to do it.
Great.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jim, and I particularly want to thank you for bringing these two wonderful students. Finally, pretty good rule number 7. Never stand so close to your position that when your position goes, you go with it. See you back here next week. We are adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, now providing return-to-work services that help get absent employees back to their jobs. Healthy employees produce healthy companies at First Choice Health. And by Enterprise Seattle. For over 35 years, Enterprise Seattle has provided client-based economic development services to businesses throughout King County and its 39 cities. More information on Enterprise Seattle and how they help businesses grow and prosper can be found at www.enterpriseseattle.org.